The very short version is our daughter was in first grade. She was in private school. I got this opportunity to do an externship in The Hague, Netherlands, and went to the school and said, what do you think we should do? And they said, well, why don't you take the books, move to The Hague, just educate her at home for this semester, and then come back and re-enroll her for second grade. And of course, we took the books and we homeschooled her for that second semester, and she's never been to any other public or private school outside of our home since, until she went to college. And so, we had the pleasure of starting our homeschool journey at a little table in a 2-bedroom apartment in The Hague.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program. Here's your host, Jim Mason.
Hi, I'm Jim Mason, President at Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and welcoming you to another episode of Homeschool Talks. I'm very excited today to be talking with our latest hired attorney, Kevin Boden. Kevin had joined us was in May?
Yes, sir. Yep.
May of last year.
May.
And he has taken up recently a very exciting new role. We want to talk to him about that. But first, Kevin, I'd like to get to know you a little better. Tell us about yourself.
Well, first, Jim, thanks for having me. I came to HSLDA last May. So I've been here for however many months that is, 9 months or so. My wife and I, my wife is Wendy, we are the homeschooling parents of 8 children, one of whom is out of the home in college. The other 7 are at home between the ages of 3 and 16. And we've been homeschooling for about 15 years now.
So, Kevin, you came to us from Alaska. What were you doing up there?
I did come from Alaska. We lived in the town of North Pole, Alaska. No joke. I was there working full-time with the Alaska Air National Guard. I was the senior attorney for the wing up there. That was following 10 years of active duty Air Force service.
And what was your actual job as an Air Force lawyer?
It varied quite a bit over the last 13 years. We did quite a bit of criminal prosecution. I did 2 years as a criminal defense attorney. Lots of what we called installation law, which is just kind of cats and dogs stuff that comes, support agreements, interacting with local officials, some labor law, some employment law, military justice. So really a wide array of things that we do as JAGs in the Air Force.
What prompted you to make such a big move, both geographically and professionally?
Really the work of HSLDA. I mean, we had been members of this organization for many years. We were familiar with their work. We read the court report and got the articles. Frankly, it was not on our radar. I met an HSLDA attorney at the Homeschool Convention in Alaska, Dan Beasley, whose place I took. I talked with him about the job and what it was like to work here. And frankly, it sounded great. So I applied the next week and told you that I couldn't start quickly, and you asked me to come quickly, and the Lord made it happen, and here we are.
Well, what do you do for HSLDA?
So I handle contact work for 12 states.
What is contact work?
So contact work is work that we do when a member has an issue in any particular state. There's an attorney assigned to that state, a legal team, really, an attorney and a legal assistant. And we just help those members work through a variety of issues. And sometimes they're fairly complicated and involved, and sometimes they're fairly simple. How do I homeschool in Maryland? I'm new there. What do I do? And sometimes it's much more complex. But yeah, when I say contact work, it's just responding to member contacts and needs that they have.
And you're just entering into your first legislative season. What's that like for you?
Busy is what it's like. I have found it so far very exciting. Lots of engagement with state groups. It's just been encouraging on a number of levels. One is being involved in the work. Another is being involved with these state leaders and organizations that really, really are well organized. They know what they're doing. They're passionate about homeschool in their respective states. So the opportunity to partner with them in their work to move the ball of homeschool freedom forward, I think is just very exciting.
Now, what states are you a contact attorney for?
All right, let me see if I can list all 12 here.
Oh my!
I'll start in the way northwest, which is Alaska. So I handle Alaska, Washington, Tennessee, Nebraska, Arizona, Indiana, Maryland, South Carolina, North and South Dakota, Alabama, and Georgia. I think I got them all.
And Tennessee.
And Tennessee. Did I miss Tennessee? I missed it.
I don't think you said Tennessee.
Okay, I do handle Tennessee.
I'm just showing off that I know all of your 12 states and you don't.
I appreciate that.
So working with the state leaders is a big part of what we do. It's kind of a, one of the keystones of the work we do. You were a state leader in Alaska before you came here.
I was.
And what's you've seen it now from both sides. What were you doing up there, and how did that inform what you do now?
So what I did up there in Alaska, the homeschool group up there is called the Alaska Private and Home Educators Association. It's a group that supports independent homeschooling in Alaska, which, without getting into the nuts and bolts of the uniqueness of Alaska, they aim to support homeschool families. They throw an annual convention, usually around April. And so my wife and I had gotten involved in their work, wanted to be involved kind of grassroots at the homeschool level in the state. So we were heading that up when I met Dan last year for this job. And so from that perspective, I know the support that organizations like HSLDA provide in sending speakers and having them go to those conferences, and the support they provide to individual members. And then now from this perspective, I can be a part of providing that support. So I think, frankly, being a part of AFI, as we call it, helps me in my kind of goal of being a support and a resource for those state organizations, because I've been one of those members. And it's a labor of volunteer love for a lot of these folks. They pour their heart and soul into this, and for free, because they love their kids, they love the homeschooling community, and they want to see it grow. So it's nice to know and have experienced that from a personal level.
Yeah, that's one of the real, magic qualities of the homeschool movement. The volunteerism, and the passion that people all over the country see the blessing of homeschooling for their own family, get involved in a local support group, maybe even advance into a larger support group or the state level, and throw in those conferences for the benefit of new families joining the homeschool movement. It's just an amazing, kind of ecosystem that the homeschool movement, when you understand it, it's family by family, but then there's all of these interconnectedness. It's something that really bothers me a lot when, people talk about, well, what about socialization, and what about, learning how to be a part of the community. Yeah. And you realize that the homeschooling movement built its own community that people outside the movement aren't really aware of. Yeah. And, that's why when we first met, it was really, a big draw for me that you had already done that side of things to come and work on this side of things.
Well, and they do it without glamour, without recognition. I mean, it's been impressive just to see that. And now when I talk to state leaders and they're putting on a convention or they're trying to plan this, little things like getting back to them in a timely manner, so that as they have their meetings with their state organization, they're not waiting for me to say, well, can Kevin come? Can he not come? What does he want? What's he going to talk on? Just to be responsive, so that as they give their volunteer time, they're most, best positioned to put on a good conference or whatever they're going to do. So it informs how responsive I am to them, because I know the flip side of that.
Yeah. So we have a pretty dynamic role in the homeschooling ecosystem. How would you describe it now that you've been here for a while?
Oh, man. I think we're a great resource to the homeschool community at a number of levels. It's to those families that are just starting. It's to those families that have been homeschooling for a long time. It's to the state leaders that are doing stuff at the state level. And it's also for regional folks. I mean, I've talked to a number of leaders that, maybe they have a Facebook following of a couple hundred people, and they want to be able to reach those couple hundred as best they can. It's not a state level, thing for them, but it's just the people in their community. And so I just love the fact that we're positioned both with the member contacts, positioned with legislation, and then, frankly, positioned globally, just to be a continued asset to this entire movement.
So you mentioned globally. Was that a cue for me to switch?
It's just on my mind, maybe from the work that's coming up.
So one of the distinctive background things that Kevin and your wife Wendy brought to Homeschool Legal Defense Association is, as a military member on active duty, living in foreign lands, you guys actually homeschooled internationally.
We did.
Well, tell us a little bit about that.
So we got our homeschool start as an international family, if you will. So the very short version is our daughter was in first grade. Our oldest daughter, who's now 21 and in college, she was in private school. I got this opportunity to do an externship in The Hague, Netherlands for the second semester of this particular law school for this year, and went to the school and said, what do you think we should do? And they said, well, why don't you take the books, move to The Hague, just educate her at home for this semester, and then come back and re-enroll her for second grade. And of course, we took the books and we homeschooled her for that second semester. And she's never been to any other public or private school outside of our home since, until she went to college. And so, we had the pleasure of starting our homeschool journey at a little table in a 2-bedroom apartment in The Hague.
And were you homeschooling under the laws of the Netherlands?
I had no idea what the laws of the Netherlands are. I didn't ask, and it was kind of I didn't know if anybody cared, and I figured, well, let's just cross that bridge when we get to it. So we were not with the military there, so there was no sense of like status of forces agreement protections or any type of governmental protections. It was just us doing our thing and hoping for the best, and here we are.
And you survived, and she's 21 and in college.
At 21 and in college.
So later on in your homeschooling career, I think you had an opportunity to homeschool in another country.
We did. So our first assignment with the Air Force was at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. So we moved there in 2000, I think it would have been 2009. We were there for 3 years, and we did homeschool in Germany as well. There's a lot of Americans, so that's a little bit less probably threatening. Although you do get a lot of the contacts, you do get a lot of the comments from local nationals. They wonder why your kids aren't in school. We had 2 young boys at the time too. I think Isaiah and Oliver were 2 and 3 respectively. And our landlord routinely reminded us that they can get free education in the German system starting at 2, and we should send them there. And we politely reminded him that we educate our kids at home, and we didn't have any problems, although it really, really is a foreign concept. It's just tough for the average German to even grasp why you would do this and why you would even want to do this. So.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting mindset. We've had a fair amount of dealings with Germany over the years. What was your legal status as a military member living out in the community in Germany?
Well, we called them SOFA protections. So we had status of forces agreement protections. I personally think it's unclear whether that SOFA actually provides legal protections with respect to homeschooling. I think it's unclear. And in fact, there's a German attorney who works at the Ramstein Law Center on the base. Matthias, I don't know if he's still there. He might have moved on by now. He generally agreed that it was vague and unclear. At the end of the day, there's 50,000 Americans, and we call it the KMC, the Kaiserslautern Military Community. And I just don't think the German government had any interest in causing a ruckus by going after homeschooling American families. There's a lot of us there. We bring in a lot of economy to that area. And so I think probably, if I had to guess, it was just not something that was worthwhile for them to pursue.
Well, and you're also not going to be there very long.
Correct.
Correct. So that has translated into an opportunity for you here at HSLDA. Tell us about that.
So recently you asked me to be the director of global outreach, and it's a very exciting role. I'm very excited and interested in what HSLDA can do to help bring some of these freedoms to places that don't have it, to maybe, shift the mindset even a little bit with families and countries. And that's not to say that we'll, legalize homeschooling in these countries, or that will, make these leaps and bounds, but perhaps we can encourage homeschooling families that are there. Perhaps we can expand that even a little bit in these countries that we're in. And so I'm taking over from Mike Donnelly, who I knew poured his heart and soul into the international work and expanding this freedom around the globe. And I'm just super excited to have the opportunity to carry that torch forward.
So when this opportunity presented itself, I learned something about you that I didn't know when we were interviewing just for the main job. you've had a long time interest in international law.
I have. In fact, the impetus for going to law school was the work of the International Justice Mission, and so we visited them in college in a summer college program. Got to know their work. It was that organization that drove me to pursue law school after I completed at Wheaton College, and so it was this desire for international human rights work, and the Lord didn't open that door, right after law school, and I joined the Air Force. Was there for 10 years, as I mentioned, in the Air National Guard. The Lord brought me here. And it's just interesting to see how he has brought that a little bit full circle from that initial, desire, 15 years ago, 18 years ago, to having that opportunity now to do some of that international human rights work with respect to homeschooling. I just find it, the purposes and ways of the Lord are just, they amaze me constantly.
Well, what steps are you taking now? You're just getting started in the international outreach role, and Mike's still here. You're kind of turning over and learning. What have you learned so far that really excites you?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I've learned they're exciting. The first is that there's a lot of great people around the globe that are excited about the work in their respective countries. And so just like we talked earlier about kind of the state leaders, they're excited about what they're doing. There's that same level of excitement within these various countries, in Portugal, in France, in Brazil. I mean, just all over the globe, these people they love their countries and they want to see homeschool expand. So I think that's very exciting that it's not an HSLDA top-down driven effort. It's a bottom-up, providing what supportive and assistance we can. The other thing that's exciting and I'm doing is just getting to know these people better. What are they doing? What are their needs? What can we do to help? We can provide a level of resource and continuity and connective tissue for these leaders that they might not otherwise have. And so I think that's very exciting. I think the commitment of HSLDA to the international expansion of homeschool freedom is great, and I think it'll bear great fruit moving forward.
One of the things that since I've become president, I've been more involved and interested in our international work. And I took a trip to Costa Rica for a conference of folks from different countries in Latin America. What's the opportunity there in Latin America, do you think?
Well, I think there's great opportunity. One of the things that came out of a recent meeting with some of these international parties was some of the forcing of a type of curriculum that's causing really religious people that were not homeschoolers before to become more homeschooling minded because they don't like what's happening in the school system, similar to kind of what we're seeing here. The other thing is, in fact, over the weekend, I just met a lady who's doing research in Colombia. She's a homeschooling mom. She's concerned about parents. She's kind of focused on bullying in schools, but she's looking and excited about the opportunities that are going on in Colombia. So I think there's great opportunity in Latin America to continue to look at homeschool freedom and how we might advance that.
So why should American homeschoolers care about HSLDA's global outreach mission?
Because I think what we do, I think what happens globally impacts what happens here and vice versa. For example, a lot of the opponents of homeschool freedom in the U.S., the more they can point to international examples of freedom being restricted, I think the more their argument is bolstered within the U.S., right? You've got a lot of people that think that we ought to be aligned with the international space and treaties and so on and so forth. So as homeschool freedom is expanded internationally, their ability to use that argument against homeschool laws in the U.S. lessens, but the contrary is also true. As homeschool freedom becomes more restricted internationally, they can point to that restriction as an argument to continue to restrict homeschool freedom here. So while you may never homeschool in Spain or Germany or South America or South Africa or wherever, I think you have an interest in what happens there because those arguments are being used against homeschoolers here, whether they think they should or ought to be or not.
So when you go back to the history of homeschool freedom in the United States, back into the 70s and early 80s, there were a lot of states that were pretty hostile to homeschooling. And today that's not really the case. There's some kind of lingering hostilities, but it's pretty easy to homeschool legally everywhere in America. So as we saw that happen, is there a more kind of positive case for our outreach internationally?
Well, I think what we see is that it's possible. Part of what you're dealing with internationally is the legal framework or underpinning for advancing the homeschool movement internationally varies. And you've got some legal frameworks where it's much more possible, and some legal frameworks where it's going to be a very hard place to advocate for. I mean, obviously Germany's one of them. They're fairly, well known in that respect. But we can, I think, use the examples that we've had here in the 80s, and before, as a model forward. It won't be the same in every country, but certainly we can use those pictures. Because part of that, as you've alluded to, is just a voluntary association of parents and the love that they have for their kids and their communities that launch these movements forward. And so while the legal framework may be different in France, the voluntary association of parents and love for their kids and their communities is probably the same. So we need to look at what it looks like in that country and that community to advance it forward from a legal perspective, using the passion, I think, and the energy of those families as the driving force behind it.
We think homeschool freedom in America is a blessing for our children and for future generations. And so, we have resources, and we have been blessed, and we have the opportunity and the ability to help these movements all across the country. And it's really, really interesting to me, this trip that I took to Latin America. People from every single country, the leaders of the homeschooling movement in their country, expressed it in almost exactly the same way as somebody from Iowa or California. They're facing different legal regimes, but it's all about providing the blessing to their children. And a lot of that comes from a Christian faith, as I know you share. How do you deal with that around the world, where some of the countries may be a little more secular?
I think we serve all those families in those countries the same. I mean, we are not. We're there to provide a framework and a connective tissue for them to move this ball forward with respect to homeschool freedom. And so, some of the terms that they use, for example, is we support this homeschool freedom regardless of motivation or methodology. And so, we don't look at why you're choosing to homeschool or even how you're homeschooling, but we look at, do you support liberty and the homeschool movement and the freedom to do that, regardless of why any particular family may choose, one reason over the other? So I don't look at it from a secular or religious viewpoint. We look at it from do you support freedom, and do you love your kids, and do you want to see this expanded to your communities? And that's really what we're looking at.
Well, Kevin, what final thoughts do you have for our listeners?
I think just keep up the good work. I mean, if you're a homeschooling mom or dad, we're there. As I mentioned, we've got 7 kids, 16 to 3 at home. I mean, you're in the trenches, you're doing the work day in and day out. And I talk to a lot of parents that sometimes forget kind of why they started doing what they're doing. And it can be easy to get distracted on this, that, or the other thing. And at the end of the day, I hope parents just remember that they're the best teacher of their kids. They're fully competent. They're fully capable of doing what they're doing. And frankly, it's some of the most important work in the world. So I just would encourage them to keep on plugging away in the day in, day out grind of life. It's worth it. It matters, and it'll pay dividends.
And I'd just like to remind everyone that we have Kevin and other attorneys here to help you if there are any legal obstacles. And when we help one family overcome legal obstacles, it often helps many, many families in the same area or in the same state. We also have other resources to help homeschooling families. We have educational consultants, and we have a lot of resources on our website and other places to help you get started, help you get connected. And we have a charitable mission as well, if you wanted to donate to that to help homeschooling families in need. And so for Kevin Boden, I'm Jim Mason, President of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I'd invite you to visit our website at hslda.org to learn more about what we do here. And if you'd like to join, you can do that there. If you'd like to donate to Homeschool Freedom or to our compassion work, you can do that there as well. So thanks for joining us today, Kevin.
Thank you.
Every week, HSLDA hears from hundreds of homeschool families, many of whom are facing hostility from school officials or discrimination from colleges and employers. We've helped single parents facing criminal charges for homeschooling their children, families traumatized by wrongful CPS investigations, and even a grandmother harassed by the state for homeschooling her granddaughter. By donating to HSLDA, you can help make homeschooling possible for families like these and enable our work to preserve freedom for future generations. Give today at hslda.org/donate. That's hslda.org/donate. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.